I had worked hard for years to finally buy myself a quiet little property at the edge of town. The land wasn't huge, but it was mine, and it gave me peace that the noisy city never could. A small wooden fence marked the boundary line between my backyard and the neighboring lots. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple but well-kept fence I had repaired with my own hands, and it gave me a sense of privacy. Little did I know, that fence was about to become the center of a war I never asked for. It started innocently enough, or at least that's how I thought. A few months after I moved in, I noticed a woman from the neighboring street cutting through my yard. At first I thought maybe she was lost. Maybe she had dropped something, or maybe she was visiting someone nearby. But then I noticed her again the next day. And the day after that, each time she would casually stroll across my backyard, push open a loose section of the fence, and disappear onto the main road beyond. I wasn't the confrontational type, but by the fourth time, I decided to step outside and stop her. "Excuse me," I said, trying to sound polite. "Can I help you with something?" The woman stopped and looked at me with an expression that screamed entitlement. She was in her mid-40s with bleached blonde hair tied in a tight bun, oversized sunglasses, and a scowl that looked like it was permanently etched into her face. "No," she said flatly. "I'm just taking a shortcut. This fence is in the way." I blinked. "This is my property," I explained. "The fence is here for a reason. I'd appreciate it if you didn't cut through my yard," the woman scoffed. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. I've been walking this way for years, long before you even bought this place. Everyone knows this is the fastest way to the road. You can't just expect me to walk all the way around." I clenched my jaw, trying to stay calm. "Ma'am, I don't mind if you walk around, but this is private property. Please respect that." She rolled her eyes and walked off without another word. That was my first encounter with Karen. For the next week, I noticed her coming through less often, though she still did it when she thought I wasn't looking. Then one Saturday morning, I woke up to the sound of crack. Crack, crack! I rushed outside to find her in my yard with a hammer smashing down a section of my fence. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted. She turned to me, not looking the least bit guilty. "This fence is in my way," she snapped. "You should be thankful I'm fixing it for you. It was wobbly anyway." "You're not fixing it, you're destroying it," I shouted. "Get off my property right now." Karen crossed her arms. "This shortcut is public access. I've been using it for 20 years. Just because you bought this land doesn't mean you can keep me from walking here." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "This isn't public access, it's my backyard. If you don't leave right now, I'll call the police." That got her to huff and storm off, muttering something about rude neighbors and entitled newcomers. But the damage was already done. An entire panel of my fence was splintered and lying on the ground. I thought that would be the end of it. I figured she had made her point, as ridiculous as it was, and she'd finally stop. But the next day I found kids cutting through my yard too. Neighbors' kids running through the opening she had created. Soon enough, it wasn't just Karen and the kids. Other people from the block started using the shortcut as if my yard were a public park. I patched up the fence as best I could, but 2 days later, Karen smashed it down again. This time she didn't even pretend, it was deliberate. That's when I called the police. When the officer arrived, I explained everything: how she had been trespassing, how she destroyed my fence, and how she claimed she had a right to use my yard as a shortcut. The officer spoke with her, but Karen was slippery. She claimed the fence was already broken and dangerous, and that she was helping the neighborhood by making it safe. She argued that the path had been used for decades and that she had easement rights. The officer gave me a sympathetic look, but told me it was ultimately a civil matter. "She shouldn't be breaking your fence," he said, "but if she claims there's an easement, you'll need to check property records and maybe take it up in court." Karen smirked at me as the officer left. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a fence anymore. This was about control, so I started digging. I went down to the county records office and asked for the property maps, deeds, and any easements tied to my land. It took a few hours, but when I finally got the papers, I felt like I had struck gold. There was no easement, no path, no right-of-way. My backyard, every inch of it, was mine. Karen had no legal right to step foot on it. But while going through the records, I noticed something even more interesting. The boundary line between my property and hers wasn't drawn the way she thought. In fact, the narrow strip of land she thought belonged to her actually belonged to a third party, the original developer of the neighborhood, who had gone bankrupt years ago. That strip had gone unclaimed and was sitting with the county for unpaid taxes. A light bulb went off in my head. If Karen thought she could bully me by smashing my fence, maybe it was time I fought back in a way she would never see coming. The next week, I filed paperwork with the county to purchase that forgotten boundary strip. It wasn't expensive, it was maybe 6 feet wide and ran the length of her property line. Most people wouldn't care about such a useless sliver of land, but for me it was priceless. Because with that strip, I now completely boxed her in. Karen's yard, her driveway, and her so-called shortcut all now touched my land. And I had every right to fence it off. When the sale went through, I wasted no time. I hired contractors to build a sturdy, tall wooden fence along the new boundary. This wasn't the flimsy little thing I had patched before. This was a fortress, solid posts cemented into the ground, reinforced panels, and a gate that locked from my side. When Karen saw the construction crew in her yard one morning, she came running out in a fury. "What are you doing? You can't put a fence here. This is my property line," she shrieked. I calmly showed her the deed. "Actually, this land belongs to me now. Every inch of it. And since you don't respect boundaries, I'm making them very clear." She snatched the papers from my hand, scanning them with disbelief. "This is fraud. You can't just buy land out from under me." "Oh, but I did," I said with a smirk. "And now the shortcut is closed permanently." Karen's face turned red with rage. "You can't do this." "I'll call the cops." "I'll call the mayor." "Be my guest," I said. "They'll only confirm that you've been trespassing all along." By the time the fence was finished, Karen's shortcut was no more. In fact, her own backyard access was now restricted because she had relied on that strip of land to get her trash bins out to the street. Now she had to drag them through her front door just to reach the curb. She had trapped herself with her own arrogance, and I was only just getting started. When the contractors finally packed up their tools and left, I stood in my backyard staring at the brand new fence with a deep sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just wood and nails, it was a line drawn in bold letters. Enough is enough, but I knew Karen wouldn't take this lying down. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I heard a furious pounding on my front door. When I opened it, Karen stood there, face red, fists clenched. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she hissed. "Buying that land just to spite me?" I folded my arms. "I bought land that was for sale. Perfectly legal. What you did, trespassing, vandalizing, destroying my property, that's illegal. You can't trap me on my own property," she shouted. "I have rights." "No," I said evenly. "You had the privilege of me looking the other way when you cut through. You abused it, and now the boundary is mine. You don't get to use it anymore." Her eyes narrowed into slits. "You'll regret this. I know people. I'll have this fence taken down." "Good luck," I said, and shut the door in her face. The next few days were strangely peaceful. For the first time since moving in, no one trampled across my yard. No one smashed my fence. I drank my coffee in the mornings on the porch, listening to the birds instead of Karen's shrill voice. But I should have known peace with Karen never lasted long. On the 4th day, I came home from work to find spray paint on my fence. Giant red letters spelling "selfish loser" across the wood. I clenched my fists so tight my nails dug into my palms. Karen had gone from vandalizing my fence with a hammer to vandalizing it with graffiti. That night I installed cameras, motion-activated, high definition, with cloud backup. If Karen wanted to play dirty, I would have evidence this time. Sure enough, the following evening I caught her in the act. On my camera feed, there she was, creeping out with a flashlight and a can of spray paint. She hadn't noticed the small camera nestled under the eaves. I filed a police report the next morning and handed over the footage. This time there was no way for her to wriggle out of it. The officer called me later that afternoon to confirm they had issued her a citation for trespassing and vandalism. When Karen saw the squad car pull up to her house, I swear the whole neighborhood peeked out their windows. She screamed and argued with the officer for 20 minutes before finally slamming her door. For the next 2 days, she avoided me. But I knew she was stewing. Then came the trash incident. Every Thursday morning, the garbage truck made its rounds. Before I bought the boundary strip, Karen had simply wheeled her bins out through the side yard, right across the land I now owned. With the fence in place, she had no way to get them out without dragging them through her living room and down the front porch steps. I thought maybe she would swallow her pride and just deal with it. But no, Karen had other plans. That Thursday, I woke up to a horrible stench. When I stepped outside, I nearly gagged. Karen had dumped her overflowing garbage bags right against my new fence. Flies buzzed, raccoons picked at the scraps, and a foul smell drifted across my entire backyard. I stormed over and banged on her door. "What the hell, Karen?" I demanded when she cracked it open. She smirked. "Oh, those?" The garbage truck couldn't reach. "Not my fault your little wall got in the way." "That's your trash," I snapped. "Move it." She leaned casually against the doorframe. Make me. I didn't rise to the bait. Instead, I called the city sanitation department and filed a complaint. They sent someone out that afternoon, and when they saw where she had dumped the trash on my side of the property line, they fined her. Karen exploded again, yelling at the inspector until he drove off. I admit, I enjoyed that one a little too much, but the war was far from over. The next week, I heard construction noises coming from Karen's side. Curious, I peeked over the fence. She had hired some sketchy handyman to tear up her backyard, digging what looked like a trench along the boundary. "What are you doing?" I called over. Karen sneered up at me. "If you can put up a fence, so can I. I'm building a drainage ditch right against your precious wall. Let's see how you like it when your lawn floods every time it rains." I felt my blood boil. "That's illegal. You can't direct water runoff onto my property." "Watch me," she snapped. I immediately called the county zoning office. They sent an inspector, who halted her project before she got very far. Apparently she hadn't pulled permits, and what she was attempting violated half a dozen codes. When the inspector left, Karen stood in her yard shaking with fury. She pointed a finger at me like a villain in some old movie. "This isn't over," she screamed. "You think you've won, but I'll make your life hell." She kept her word. Over the next month, I endured constant petty harassment. She blasted loud music late into the night, tossed dog droppings over the fence, and even had her friends deliberately block my driveway. But instead of losing my temper, I documented everything. Every incident, every video clip, every police call. By the end of the month, I had a thick file of evidence against her, and I wasn't the only one. Other neighbors started to notice her behavior too. Some quietly thanked me for standing up to her, confessing that she had bullied them for years. She had stolen plants from one neighbor's garden, yelled at another for parking too close to her house, and even threatened kids for playing in the street. Apparently, I wasn't fighting just for myself, I was fighting for the whole block. One Friday evening, the final straw came. I returned home to find my fence spray-painted again, this time with a crude drawing and the word prison scrawled across it. I pulled the footage, and sure enough, there was Karen, giggling as she tagged my fence like a rebellious teenager. I didn't call the cops this time. I called my lawyer. We filed for a restraining order and prepared a civil lawsuit for harassment, property damage, and trespassing. Karen had crossed too many lines. The day the sheriff showed up at her door with the paperwork, the entire neighborhood buzzed. She screamed, ranted, and even threw the papers into the street. But the damage was done legally this time. For once, she looked rattled, and I wasn't finished yet, because the land I had bought didn't just cut off her shortcut. With a little creativity, I realized I could use it to make her life very uncomfortable. So, I called my contractors back. A few weeks later, Karen woke up to find her backyard fully enclosed, not just by my fence, but by a second, smaller section I had built on the boundary strip itself. Now, she wasn't just cut off, she was boxed in. The new fence created a locked corridor around her backyard with only one gate, and that gate opened onto my property. Legally, I wasn't restricting her access to her own yard. But practically, she couldn't move a thing, trash bins, lawn equipment, anything without my permission, and I had no intention of granting it. When she stormed over to demand an explanation, I handed her the deed again. "Remember? This land is mine, and since you love using my property so much, I thought I'd make sure you never forget whose it is." Her face turned pale as she realized the truth. She was trapped. Her shortcut was gone. Her trash solution was gone. Her control was gone. And for the first time since I moved in, I saw something in her eyes I never thought I'd see. Fear. For weeks after I boxed Karen in with the boundary fence, the neighborhood felt different, calmer somehow. Kids played outside without her shrieking at them. Neighbors waved at me in solidarity, and for once, Karen wasn't storming across my yard like she owned it. But that didn't mean she had given up. Karen wasn't the type to surrender. She was the type to dig in her heels and escalate until she either got her way or destroyed everything around her. And sure enough, that's exactly what she tried to do. The first sign came one Saturday morning when I saw a group of men in hard hats unloading lumber and power tools on her driveway. Curious, I went out front to watch. Karen spotted me immediately. She strutted over with her trademark smirk, hands on her hips. "Enjoy your little prison walls while you can," she sneered. "I'm putting up a new addition. A raised deck right up against your fence. I'll see everything you do every time you step outside. Hope you don't mind an audience." I raised an eyebrow. "Did you get a permit for that?" Her smirk faltered for just a second, then came back sharper. "None of your business." "Actually," I said, "it's very much my business if you're building illegally right against my property line. But go ahead, build it. I'll be calling the zoning inspector first thing Monday." She stomped back toward her house, shouting at the workers to get started. For 2 days they hammered and drilled, building a rickety skeleton of what was supposed to be her deck. On the third day, the inspector arrived, thanks to my call. He took one look at the half-built monstrosity, shook his head, and slapped a giant red stop-work order on the frame. The workers packed up and left. Karen stood in her yard, fists shaking, face beet red. "You!" she screamed at me over the fence. "You ruined everything." "No," I called back calmly. "You ruined it by not following the law. I just reminded the county it exists." She hurled a plastic flower pot at the fence. It bounced harmlessly off the reinforced boards. But her deck fiasco was just the beginning. The next week, I noticed her standing in her driveway with a clipboard, whispering with 2 other women from the neighborhood. They glanced at me, then quickly looked away. Later, I found flyers tucked under my windshield wipers and slipped into my mailbox. The flyers accused me of harassing a longtime resident, of destroying community tradition, and of being a selfish newcomer who hates neighbors. At the bottom, it urged people to sign a petition demanding I remove the fence and restore the shortcut. I couldn't help but laugh. She had turned our feud into a campaign, but when I checked around, the joke was on her. Most of the neighbors rolled their eyes. Some even brought me copies of the flyer, muttering that she had tried this kind of stunt before, petty smear campaigns, against anyone who stood up to her. A few even offered to testify on my behalf if things ever went to court. Karen's attempt to rally the neighborhood had backfired. Still, she wasn't done. One night around midnight, my security camera pinged my phone. I pulled up the live feed and felt my stomach drop. Karen was out there again, this time with a crowbar, trying to pry open the gate of the boundary fence. I grabbed my phone, hit record, and called the sheriff's department. By the time deputies arrived, she was still yanking on the gate, muttering angrily to herself. They caught her red-handed. She screamed that I had imprisoned her and that she was rescuing her freedom. The deputies weren't amused. They cited her again, this time for attempted property damage and trespassing. As they escorted her back to her house, I heard one of them mutter, "Lady, you're lucky you're not in cuffs." The fallout was immediate. The next morning, half the neighborhood watched as Karen stomped out to her mailbox to retrieve her citation notice. She tore it into shreds and threw it into the street. Kids laughed. Adults shook their heads. For the first time, I think Karen realized she wasn't the queen bee of the block anymore, and that's when she turned truly nasty. The following week, I came home to find dead plants along my side of the fence. My vegetable garden, tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, was withered, the soil damp and smelling faintly of chemicals. I knelt down, scooping some dirt into a jar. The acrid smell hit me again. Weed killer. She had poisoned my garden. I was furious, but I forced myself to think clearly. I took photos, bagged samples, and called a friend who worked in landscaping. He confirmed my suspicion. The plants had been killed by glyphosate, a strong herbicide. With that evidence, I filed yet another police report. This time, the officer didn't just give her a citation. He warned her that any further incidents could escalate into criminal charges. Karen screamed at him too. Of course, but I saw the flicker of fear in her eyes again. At that point, I realized something. Karen was spiraling. Every time she lashed out, she dug herself deeper into legal trouble, while I stayed calm, collected, and methodical. And it was working. But I wasn't satisfied with just defending myself anymore. I wanted to end this war once and for all. So I started talking to the neighbors more. I learned that Karen had made enemies everywhere. She had called code enforcement on one couple for having too many garden gnomes. She had complained to animal control about another neighbor's friendly Labrador. She had even tried to fine people for parking on the street, when she wasn't even on the HOA board. Everyone had a story. Together, we realized something powerful. United, we could stop her for good. One evening, I invited a handful of neighbors over to my backyard for a barbecue. We sat around the picnic table, ate burgers, and shared Karen horror stories. Laughter mixed with frustration as people vented years of pent-up resentment. By the end of the night, we had a plan. We would file a collective complaint with the county, documenting Karen's pattern of harassment across the entire neighborhood. With multiple signatures and testimonies, it would be harder for officials to dismiss her behavior as a civil dispute. Everyone agreed eagerly. Karen had terrorized this block for too long. It was time to fight back together. While we worked on our collective case, I made my own moves. I hired a surveyor to mark the property lines with bright orange stakes, hammering home the point that the boundary and the fence were mine beyond any doubt. Karen fumed when she saw the surveyor out there, but she couldn't stop him. When he finished, the stakes stood like little exclamation points all around her yard. "You're obsessed," she shrieked at me one afternoon. "You're a psychopath. No one likes you." "Funny," I replied calmly, "because half the neighborhood just came over for burgers." She went pale, then slammed her door so hard it rattled the frame. The final straw came one rainy night. I woke up to my phone buzzing again, another motion alert. When I checked the feed, I couldn't believe it. Karen was outside with a pair of bolt cutters trying to cut through the fence wire. She was soaked, hair plastered to her face, muttering to herself like a woman possessed. This time, deputies didn't just cite her, they arrested her. I watched from my porch as they led her away in handcuffs, her shrieks echoing through the rain. The neighborhood was quiet again after that. For a few weeks, Karen vanished. Her house sat dark, blinds drawn. People whispered that she was staying with a relative, trying to figure out her next move. But when she finally came back, she was different, quieter, more cautious. And that's when I realized I had won. She had destroyed my fence to take a shortcut. I had bought the boundary and locked her in, and now she was the one who couldn't move without thinking twice. Karen's arrest had been the talk of the neighborhood for weeks. People still whispered about it on their porches, retold the story during dog walks, and exchanged knowing smirks whenever she stepped outside. For the first time since I'd moved in, the block actually felt like a community. The air felt lighter. The neighbors waved at me like I was the unofficial hero of the street. But in the back of my mind, I knew Karen wasn't done. People like her didn't simply give up. They regrouped, plotted, and came back swinging. And I was right. The first clue came when I received an official-looking envelope in the mail one crisp Monday morning. Inside was a letter from Karen's attorney, accusing me of unlawful imprisonment and malicious harassment. The letter demanded I remove my fence within 30 days or face a lawsuit. I nearly laughed out loud. Unlawful imprisonment? Karen was free to come and go as she pleased. She just couldn't trespass on land that wasn't hers. Still, I wasn't about to ignore it. I forwarded the letter to my lawyer, who responded with a detailed packet of evidence: the deeds, the surveys, the police reports, the video footage, the citations. It was a mountain of proof showing that not only was I in the right, but Karen had been the aggressor all along. We mailed the response back. I imagined Karen's face as she opened it, her checkmate move turning to dust in her hands. But instead of backing down, Karen doubled down. Within a week, she had filed a civil complaint in county court, trying to sue me for emotional distress, property devaluation, and loss of traditional neighborhood access. The judge scheduled a preliminary hearing. I wasn't nervous. If anything, I was eager, because court meant everything would finally be out in the open. All the years of bullying, the trespassing, the vandalism, the harassment. Karen thought she was dragging me into a battle. What she didn't realize was that she had just given me the perfect stage to expose her. The day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Word had spread quickly, and half the neighborhood showed up to watch. Some even sat on the edge of their seats, grinning like they were at a theater performance. Karen strutted in wearing an expensive-looking suit, her hair in perfect curls. She glared at me like she expected me to shrink under the pressure. I didn't. When the judge called the case, her lawyer launched into a dramatic speech about how Karen had been trapped on her own property and how I had destroyed a decades-old tradition of community access. He painted her as the victim, a poor neighbor suffering at the hands of a cruel newcomer. When he finished, the judge turned to me. "Your response?" I stood, calmly handed over my thick binder of evidence, and spoke clearly. "Your Honor, this case isn't about community access. It's about boundaries. My neighbor has trespassed on my property repeatedly, vandalized my fence, poisoned my garden, and even attempted to destroy my gate with bolt cutters. I've filed reports. I've provided video evidence. I've followed the law every step of the way. All I've done is protect my property." Then I opened the binder and let the judge flip through page after page of police reports, citations, photos, and security footage stills. By the time I finished, the courtroom was buzzing. Karen jumped to her feet, shouting, "He's lying. This is all fabricated. He's obsessed with me." The judge banged his gavel. "Enough. Sit down, ma'am." Her lawyer tried to recover, but the damage was done. The judge dismissed her complaint on the spot and warned her that further frivolous lawsuits could result in sanctions. When we walked out of the courthouse, the neighbors clapped me on the back and congratulated me. Karen, meanwhile, stormed off, her face pale and tight, her entourage of supporters dwindling to nothing. You'd think that would be the end of it, but Karen had one last card to play. Late one night, weeks after the court victory, I heard rustling outside my window. My phone buzzed with another motion alert. I pulled up the live feed and froze. Karen was in my yard again. But this time she wasn't just vandalizing. She was carrying a red gas can. My blood went cold. I grabbed the phone, called 911, and whispered what I was seeing. "Stay inside," the dispatcher said firmly. "Officers are on the way." I watched in horror as Karen sloshed the liquid against my fence and pulled something shiny from her pocket. A lighter. Just as she flicked it, red and blue lights flooded the street. Patrol cars screeched to a stop and officers poured out, shouting commands. Karen froze, the lighter shaking in her hand before dropping it and raising her arms. They arrested her on the spot. This time, there was no slap on the wrist. Attempted arson was serious. Combined with her history of harassment and vandalism, the charges stacked up fast. The neighborhood was stunned, but not surprised. People whispered that they had always known she would snap one day. Some admitted they were relieved, finally free of her terror. When the trial came months later, I testified along with half the block. Karen's smirk was gone. She looked tired, worn down, cornered. The jury didn't take long, guilty. She was sentenced to time in county jail, fines and mandatory counseling. The day they took her away, the neighborhood held a block party. It wasn't an official celebration, but you could feel it in the air. Music playing, kids laughing, grills sizzling. For the first time in years, people felt free. I stood by my fence, drink in hand, watching the sunset paint the sky gold. My fence, the one she had smashed, mocked, and tried to burn, stood tall and strong, a symbol of the battle I'd fought and won. One of the neighbors came over and clapped me on the shoulder. "You know," he said, "when you moved in, I thought you were crazy for taking her on. But you saved this block from her. You did what none of us could," I smiled. "I didn't save it alone. We all did. Together." He nodded, raising his cup. "To boundaries." "To boundaries," I echoed. Months passed and Karen's house eventually went up for sale. When the for sale sign appeared, people cheered. The new owners were a young couple with a baby on the way, kind, respectful, and grateful for the fresh start. The block thrived. Gardens bloomed, kids rode bikes, neighbors chatted freely. The shortcut? It was forgotten, just a memory of darker times. And me? I enjoyed my backyard in peace. No more shouting, no more vandalism, no more fear. Karen had destroyed my fence for a shortcut, but in the end, I bought the boundary, locked her in, and showed her and everyone else that respect and law would always outlast entitlement and arrogance. And for the first time, I finally felt at home.